I don't agree with why Dr. Peterson has been asked to stop abusing students on campus.
To stop doing what?
Abusing students.
I see.
That is tantamount to abuse in your view.
Absolutely. Many global documents, many organizations.
How about violence? Is it tantamount to violence?
Yes,
How about
absolutely.
hate speech? Is it tantamount to hate speech?
Yes, of course. It's hate speech
Fine,
to tell someone that you...
If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Hope all's good wherever you are. In this video, we're going to watch an older clip of Jordan Peterson, and this video has aged like fine wine. Everything he pretty much predicts in the video has come through. Now, this is a clip of about a 1-hour show. I will link the full show in the description down below. I just took the section of Jordan Peterson and Nicholas Matt, their little debate there, but Jordan Peterson does debate a few other people in this show. If you should feel like checking it out, go click the link down below. Let's get to the video.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is to lay the case out. What is it you find offensive about this legislation?
Well, fundamentally, there were two things that really bothered me, although there have been other things I've thought about since. One was that I was being asked, as everyone is, to use a certain set of words that I think are the constructions of people who have a political ideology that I don't believe in and that I also regard as dangerous.
What are those words? Those
are the made-up words that people now describe as gender neutral. And so, to me, they're an attempt to control language and in a direction that isn't happening organically. It's not happening naturally. People aren't picking up these words in the typical way that new words are picked up, but by force and by fiat. And I would say by force because there's legislative power behind them. So and I don't like these made-up words, Z and Zer and that sort of thing.
Okay, what about, they're not all made-up, quote-unquote made-up words. For example, they is one of them. Yeah, to speak to an individual as they.
Right, but we can't dispense with the distinction between singular and plural. I mean, I know that the advocates of that particular approach say that they has been used forever as a singular, and that's actually not correct. It's used as a singular in very exceptional circumstances, like if your child wishes to bring a book to school, they're welcome to do so. But
that's just grammatically incorrect.
Well, it is also, there's some debate about that because it is, they is used like that sometimes, but it's never been used as a singular replacement for he or she. And so it's not a tenable solution, and that's the best of the solutions.
So we understand your views and where you're coming from. You decided to lay these views out in some YouTube discourses.
Yes.
You put them up. The response has been overwhelming. Did you anticipate that you would get this kind of feedback?
No, there was no way of anticipating this. And I think you mentioned in the intro, you know, that this is a consequence of what I've done. And I don't think that's true. It's a consequence of the fact. I thought about it, and I think the right metaphor is that, you know, there's a large forest, and it's been a hot, dry summer, or maybe a drought, and there's plenty of dead wood gathered. And I lit a spark, and you can't blame the forest fire on the spark. And, you know, it's just not possible for someone to put up a YouTube video and cause this kind of brouhaha without all of the groundwork already being laid.
Fair enough. There is clearly there is out there an appetite against political correctness, which is what you have described this as. In fact, your YouTube video is called Professor Against Political Correctness. But let's make sure we're all speaking the same language here. You would define that how? Political correctness.
Well, I think it's a particular kind of ideological game, and I think the outcome is twofold. It's to make the player feel morally superior and also to take rather serious axe swings at the foundation of society. And so the game is identify a domain of human endeavor, note that there's a distribution of success. Some people are doing comparatively better and some people are doing comparatively worse. Define those doing worse as victims. Define those doing better as perpetrators. Identify with the victims, have yourself a set of enemies handy to vent your resentment on, feel good about it even though it didn't really require any work on your part, and then endlessly repeat. And that's why I've seen that happening on campuses in particular for the last 30 years.
Of course, here he's referring to the pronoun people, but also we've seen this with affirmative action, right? These days, 2023, 2024, even 7 years ago when this was taken, victimhood was becoming the new currency. And let's face it, when you start calling people they instead of a singular person, you start changing language. Once you change language, you're changing truth. And at the end of the day, truth matters. And our refusal to play pretend with someone when it comes to these pronoun people is not the same as attacking them. To be honest, them forcing us to try to play pretend is more of an attack on the English language. It's an attack on society. To steal a quote from Jordan Peterson, the tyranny of the minority will not dictate my speech. That's exactly how I feel about it. Let's get back to the video.
You know, of course, that since this story broke, you've been called a lot of things.
Yeah.
One of which is a transphobe.
Yeah.
Some people have accused you of using the free speech issue to mask what's really going on here, which is an attempt to deprive other people of what they believe are their legitimate rights. Well, and I want to give you the opportunity to speak to whether or not you are a transphobe.
Well, I can tell you that I've received more letters from transsexual people supporting me than opposing me. And I never said anything really about transsexual people, about their existence, although that was the first thing that I was accused of doing. I didn't say that transsexual people didn't exist. I said that gender identity, gender expression, and biological sex do not vary independently, which they don't. And so this issue is in some sense only peripherally about transsexual issues. It's more centrally about gender issues. And then on top of that, and I think it's the biggest issue, is that it's a free speech issue.
Okay, let us continue to explore all of those issues that you have just raised. And why don't we do this? Let's take a moment. We're going to explain a few basic things here. The issue of so-called non-traditional pronouns goes together with non-traditional gender identities. New York City, for example, recognizes 31 such gender expressions. In other words, besides man and woman, there are 29 other gender expressions. For example, pangender, queer gender, gender fluid, cross-dresser, bigendered, gender blender, and the list goes on. And Nicholas, this is where I want to bring you into the discussion because you teach this. You teach trans studies. So if you would, give us a brief primer on so many gender identities that in your view require non-traditional pronouns.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex. And I'm a historian of medicine. I can unpack that for you at great length if you want, but in the interest of time, I won't. So that's a very popular misconception. So essentially, when in my transgender studies classes, what we're doing is looking at actual research and identifying ways that current social issues related to trans people or things that are associated with trans, such as free speech arguments and claims, how that connects to the way that people are thinking, the way that research has been framed, the histories.
Give us some of the other pronouns that one would hear, typically.
I don't focus on pronouns because pronouns are actually part of a cis-normative culture. So what we do is learn about...
I'm going to stop you right there.
Yes, I was just about to explain.
Good.
So we don't start from a cis-normative perspective because that can't actually go very far.
What does cis-normative mean?
So I'm going to start us there. Cis-normative is basically the very popular idea and assumption that most people probably have, and definitely that our structures convey, that there is such a thing as male and female, that they connect to being a girl or a boy or a man or a woman. And then sometimes that will also recognize intersex or trans people or transsexual people, as you mentioned, because that's sometimes also referred to as a gender binary. So anything that fits within a gender binary can work within cis-normativity.
Okay.
But cis-normativity is basically that everyone assumes that there is male and female, and so very little is actually looked at to understand what's actually the case. And scientists have been doing this for at least over 50 years.
Your view would be it's much more complicated than that.
Right, it's not my view. I just know that for over 50 years, scientists have shown that that's not true, and yet our social systems haven't been able to find a way to address the level of complexity that people actually experience.
Can I step in?
You've heard what the professor has to say. What's your response?
Well, I don't understand what the claim that there's no such thing as biological sex means, and I certainly think it's, let's call it an error, to suggest that there's some sort of scientific consensus about that. I mean, there's biological differences between males and females in animals and human beings at every level of analysis.
Okay, I'm jumping in here, because what about the notion he put forward at the end there, that if you do not refer to people with the pronoun that they prefer to be referred to, that is a form, according to the Human Rights Commission, of discrimination.
It's not just a form of discrimination, it's a form of hate speech. That's why I made the video. I said that we were in danger of placing the refusal to use certain kinds of language into the same category as Holocaust denial, and suggested that maybe that wasn't such a good idea, especially since there's plenty of debate to be had about gender issues in our society, which I also think are also in danger of becoming illegal, and quite rapidly. So it isn't clear to me how long we'll be able to have the talk that we're having right now.
My man just used the word cis-normative culture. Listen, I don't know what that means, but I know it's a load of bullshit. Sex is binary. There's male and there's female. I go by gametes. You either have female gametes or you have male gametes. That's it, that's all. They like to bring up intersex. You still, if you are an intersex person, which is a very small percent of the population, you still only really have the reproductive organs of one sex, male or female. You don't have both. There's nobody in this planet that was ever born with both reproductive organs. And the problem, like Jordan Peterson brings up here, is when they start to make it law. Once you make it law, who decides what these laws are? When you make something hate speech, who decides what hate speech is? And to quote him again, these governments, liberals or Democrats in the US, are the people that you would least want to have control over what hate speech is. I'm somebody who now lives in Thailand. My family's passed away. My girlfriend, her family is still alive and kicking. So we decided to relocate here because it takes a village to raise a child, and it's much better for the kids to be around their family, their grandparents, since I have none left in Canada. And we are surrounded here. There's more trans people here per capita than anywhere else in the world. They call themselves ladyboys. The major difference being that they don't see themselves as quote-unquote real men or real women. They're happy to be the third gender. They call themselves ladyboys. They're happy with that. They're trans. If you call them a woman and they're not, they will correct you. So it doesn't really affect anybody. No laws are being changed. No truths are being changed. A lot of them look very much like women. I confuse them all the time, so I call them she. It's not a big deal. But in the West, when I go back to Canada and I see a grown man in a dress and you're asking me to call you she, that is not going to happen. You, sir, have a mental issue. Maybe it's a fetish or something of the sorts. Some people do have gender dysphoria, I'll agree with that, but at the same time, when it comes to, especially with young kids, you don't start chopping off body parts, right? We don't fix a problem with the mind by altering the body. If somebody chooses to use the pronouns that a certain person might want, that's up to you. And if you don't, that should be up to you as well. It shouldn't be law or considered hate speech. It'd be very different if you're going out there and purposely trying to offend people, but normal people in your day-to-day life that see a grown man with a beard use the woman's washroom and says he identifies as a woman, I am sorry, sir, but you are not a woman. Let's get back to the video.
What you might be asking for if you want to do this. For example, and Sheldon, bottom of page 3 here, let's put this graphic up. Pronoun misuse may become actionable through the human rights tribunals and the courts. And the remedies? Monetary damages, non-financial remedies, for example, ceasing the discriminatory practice or reinstatement to the job, and public interest remedies, for example, changing hiring practices or developing non-discriminatory policies and procedures. Jail time is not one of them. Jordan, you're not going to go to jail if you keep this up. Do you find that reassuring?
What if I don't pay the fine?
Then what?
Then what? And let's talk about the legalities for a minute. As you know, the University of Toronto sent me 2 warning letters, right? And the second one basically asked me to stop talking about this.
Who sent the letters?
The first, it's the administration, fundamentally, the higher up people in the administration. The last one was the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science. But, you know, it's coming from the top end of the university.
And the letter said essentially you must call people by the pronouns they want?
The letters basically said that, and this is paraphrasing obviously, that as I'm required to abide by the university policies and the Ontario Human Rights Code, and there's a strong implication in the letter by having this discussion that I wasn't doing so, and so they're asking me to stop. And I can tell you also why they're asking me to stop apart from that. The codes as written make the university just as liable for my speech as I am. So not only is there a reasonable possibility that what I'm doing is uttering hate speech now under our law, but the university is legally responsible for that. And so I think they consulted with their lawyers and decided that maybe the claim that I was making in my video was correct. So I don't regard that as trivial, and I think that the lawyer who's discussing this is downplaying the significance of it tremendously.
Could I speak to the campus climate about this? Because I don't agree with why Dr. Peterson has been asked to stop abusing students on campus.
To stop doing what?
Abusing students.
I see.
And other members of our learning community who do deserve respect and do deserve to be able to work and learn and contribute to society in a place where if they are physically assaulted, if they are
The assault so far came from the social justice warriors who were at this free speech rally, and almost 2 million people have watched those so far.
This is not accurate.
Well, you can look at the
being
videos
actioned
yourself.
because people have been making complaints about your behavior.
Yes, I understand that.
Yes.
That,
And so we're
Can I just
seeing
be
a
clear on
greater
something here, Nick?
opportunity for social justice happening
Nick, let
that
me be
many
cl-
people won't understand.
Nick, can I be clear on something? You've accused him of abusing students by not using the pronouns they want to be addressed by.
That's how I see it, absolutely.
That is tantamount to abuse in your view.
Absolutely. Many, many global documents, many
how about
organizations.
violence? Is it tantamount to violence?
Yes,
How about hate
absolutely.
speech? Is it tantamount to hate
Yes,
speech?
of course. It's hate speech
Fine,
to tell
that's-
someone that you won't refer to them as in a way that they that recognizes their humanity and dignity.
People will pick it up just as fast as they possibly can. You really see that in English. But the words that are being required now are not good tools, and that's why people aren't using them. And so instead what we have is the use of force, despite the fact that that's being denied. Although we've already established that, at least in the opinion of one of the people on this panel, I'm already guilty of a hate crime, which is what I said I was guilty of when I made that video. Steve, the issue with the law is quite straightforward. The government is requiring us to use certain language. That's not the same as not using certain language. And it's a line, and this is the fundamental issue. This is maybe the fundamental issue. That's a line we should not cross. We should not allow the government to decide which words we're allowed to use. It's a mistake. And it's a mistake that strikes right at the heart of free speech. And the thing about free speech is that it's not the right to criticize your leaders, which is what people usually characterize it as. Is freedom of speech is freedom to engage in the processes that we use to formulate the problems in our society, to generate solutions to them and reach a consensus. It's actually a mechanism. It's not just another value. And you should put constraints on free speech with the most extreme caution, because you interfere with people's ability to think and communicate.
Let me get Theron to weigh in. Theron, you've been hearing the debate here in the studio. Giving Jordan Peterson this platform serves to legitimize his views, which are based in bigotry and misinformation. The humanity and rights of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people are not a matter of debate, and holding a debate which places a false equivalency between the views expressed by Peterson and the human rights concerns of the trans community would be an act of transphobia. Therefore, none of us wish to participate in this. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. That's a very important perspective.
That's why I read it. I wonder whether, Jordan, everybody's talking past each other here. You are trying to make a point about free speech. The other side.
I think we're talking past each other.
Well, but
Steve.
the others, you're trying to make a point about free speech. The other side is trying to make a point about the rights, the human rights of trans people. That's not the point that you're trying to make. Do we have two different groups here that are trying to make two different points, and they find themselves in the same bowl of soup, and that's why this has turned into the conflagration it has?
Well, it's partly that, because the issues we're discussing have to center on some actual issues, and they happen to be centering on the issue surrounding transgender language. But I don't think we're talking past each other at all in a fundamental sense. I mean, I think that the real problem here is that there's a concerted attempt being made by many people to subvert all values to the value of equality of outcome. And we need more than one value, first of all, if we're going to survive as a society, because you can't solve every problem with the same approach. But there are more insidious things, in my estimation, going on underneath. I mean, even the missive that you just read said that, well, even providing me with a platform, let's call it, to express my views, is something that shouldn't be allowed. It's like, yes, that's why I made the video. It was because many people are claiming that the expression of these sorts of views should no longer be permitted. And it's this view for now, but this is a minor issue in some ways compared to the larger issue that's at stake, which is our right to have discussions of this sort at all. Like, I mean, one thing that happened right when we started this was that there was an initial claim, for example, that there's no such thing as biological sex. Well, I believe quite firmly that if we continue on our present path at the universities for 5 more years, that's a discussion we will not actually be able to have on campuses.
Because it will be...
By fiat, I mean, the legislation already implicitly presumes that biological sex, gender identity, and gender expression, which we haven't even talked about yet, vary independently. That is simply not true. It was an axiom, say, of feminism, for example, that the personal was political. I mean, isn't that that's a famous phrase, the personal is political.
Okay,
the personal is political when someone is attacking you on a basis that is personal and that you can't change about yourself. That is political. And that's when people sometimes become politicized, is when they realize that no matter what they do in the world, there will be people who will continue to attack them on racist grounds, on gender and sexual violence grounds, and that's why people start to fight back, and that's why people object.
And your attempts to regulate my language use, and
I don't care about your language use. I care about the safety of the people who are being harmed.
I know people who make your kinds of arguments are always concerned with other people's safety.
I'm concerned with my own safety. Just so that people are aware, my physical, emotional life and livelihood is at risk from being here. And that's not true of everyone.
In comparison to mine, say.
I don't know about yours because I don't live your life.
You know perfectly well about mine.
I do know that you have tenure and that that's one of the major ways that you're able to do this. But I just want people to be aware that trans and gender diverse communities, and especially people of color, are being targeted and threatened physically. So free speech is a great idea and equality is a great idea, but we actually can't have those conversations when people are not even able to be present.
Jordan, let me read this tweet to you and I'll get you to respond to it because I think it's instructive of the conversation that just took place between the two of you. Can someone please explain to Jordan B. Peterson that there's a difference between freedom of speech and freedom from consequence? Do you agree there's a difference?
Well, certainly there's a difference.
And are you prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that.
What does that entail?
Are you open to learning?
Well, hang on.
That's not the question.
Hang on, that wasn't the question.
It's
That's
true.
right.
Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. Now, if our society comes to some sort of consensus over the next while about how we'll solve the pronoun problem, let's call it, and that becomes part of popular parlance, and it seems to solve the problem properly without sacrificing the distinction between singular and plural, and without requiring me to memorize an impossible list of an indefinite number of pronouns, then I would be willing to reconsider my position. But I'm also partly opposed to this because it's been made mandatory and has the whole weight of the law behind it. It's like, this is a very bad idea. I believe this is a very bad idea. And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization.
We've become such a weak society. Everybody's worried about other people's feelings. Jordan Peterson even came out on record and said that he's had trans students and he called them by the proper pronoun, but that was his choice. He was not doing it because someone was being tyrannical and dictating to him how he should speak. And this Nicholas Matt, who's proper doink, saying that it's the same as violence or hate speech. Listen, if you think that's the same as violence, obviously you've never been punched in the face or practiced any combat sports, because trust me, it is not the same. And clearly, just because a grown man wakes up one morning and says, well, today I identify as a woman, and let's face it, no man on the planet knows what it's like to feel like a woman, to be like a woman. You'll never give birth, you'll never have a period. You have different chromosomes, hormones. Just because you think that's your reality doesn't make it the reality. Let's get back to the video. And that's the problem a lot of people have. I think a lot of people wouldn't really care about this topic if it didn't affect women's spaces, if it didn't affect our children in school and what's being taught to them, if laws weren't made, anti-free speech laws. We have speech laws. You're not allowed to go out and incite violence, but you leave speech alone. If somebody's going to be a jerk or a dick and say stuff that the majority of people aren't aligned with, somebody's going to tell them, okay? There'll be a F around and find out moment. You leave it alone. Changing everybody's lifestyle and the laws to suit, what, 2% of the population makes no sense at all to me. Great to go back and review these clips of Jordan Peterson. I wish he still did interviews like this, to be honest with you. I know people just try to get a clickbait moment out of him, to try to bait him into something. But he was so good at these types of discussion, these types of interviews. I get that now he has his own podcast and he gets to pick the guests that go on, and I love his podcast. It's one of my favorite ones. I listen to most of the episodes. Actually, it's one of the only podcasts. Him and Theo Vaughn. I listen to most of the episodes. Lex Friedman I really like. But I missed these. These were great. Anyways, if you all enjoyed this video, please smash that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing to the channel. Help it grow. And I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.